Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you're listening to the Intentional Wellbeing Podcast. Dianne is on the struggle bus today, but I think I'm actually getting off. I am so excited to talk to you about someone I've been following intentionally on social media platforms. More to the point, Instagram, Naya Bajaj, who is a yoga therapist who we both share a passion for how yoga can add intentional healing and well-being to your life. I've been following her. I've been sharing her work. I've been excited that she's a fellow Canadian. I'm excited that she's a fellow brown girl. I'm not going to lie, because I feel like a lot of intentional or just wellness spaces in general are not created with black and brown folks as the center of that healing, that after we are an afterthought of that healing. But I want to share with you all the wonderful things she is and all the wonderful things she does. She has a professional background in activism and public service. So those are the two things that really brought you into my light and really made me, want to follow you. I love anybody who can add well-being and activism together, because I think those things are uniquely linked. I love that you work in public service and, more importantly, in the healthcare systems in Canada, which, if you're unaware and not Canadian, are currently in crisis. And we understand that just because things are happening here doesn't mean that they're not happening all over the world, because we are globally connected and rooted in trying to unpack and trying to dismantle, and not only trying to actively doing so, oppressive systems that make it challenging for people to get their goals and healthcare needs met. So it's amazing that she's here to support the advocacy, your advocacy, and to help you educate you on the healthcare system. She's there as a connection. She is there as an advocate. She is there as an ally. And so she's here combining these two wonderful modalities together, yoga and therapy, to help us find our way back to ourselves. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me, Dianne. It's so lovely to be here. I've been following your work since I was a yoga student, so well before I became a yoga therapist. And so it's really exciting to sit down with you.
Oh, thank you. And you have been so patient. I have to be transparent, listeners. We have had to reschedule this many a time because life has just gotten in the way. And the last time that we had to reschedule, my assistant said to me, "Do not screw this up, because she will not talk to you again. You've had so many things like just boom come into the way and really derail us." And what I loved about what you said, which is a really great way going forward when you've messed up and you're giving people grace, you were like, it will happen when it's supposed to happen. The timing just wasn't right. And we learn that a lot in yoga, don't we? That if we, for the lack of a better term, go with the flow and let things happen, a lot of the times they happen when they should happen, as opposed to forcing things to happen. So I'm glad that it all came together. I'm not going to lie, Monday morning is always a rough start for me. I always call it Hot Mess Monday. I usually teach a yoga class. I roll in usually either forgetting my music or my mat or my towel or my water bottle or my flow or the theme of the class or whatever. Mondays are the days where I'm like, what's happening? Is it Monday? Are we still in October? All those kind of things. So thank you for helping me get off to a much better start on Hot Mess Monday. Thank you.
No worries. My grandfather used to say, and I had a hard time understanding this as a high achieving child who wanted to sort of control everything in the universe, but he was like, all you can do is your best, and then you have to leave it up to the universe. You cannot control everything. And it's taken sort of 36 odd years for me to actually make sense of that. So
right.
I appreciate that. Yeah, until the universe was ready for us to meet, it didn't happen, and now we're here.
I appreciate that. I'm using a little bit of that philosophy in dealing with my children, actually. Like, I have given it up to God or the universe, however you want to connect with that energy, that one day they will clean their rooms. So for now, I just close the door. It's just not time. There's going to be a moment where they're going to be panicking, looking for something to wear to work or school. And I will say, well, You want to dig through the mess on the floor, I'm sure it's there. And then they'll see the value of hanging things up and like organizing things. Because I am like you, I was a high achieving child, and I think it comes a lot from the fact that my parents are immigrants. I am a first generation Canadian. And so it was really impressed upon me as a child of an immigrant is that we come here and we work hard and we achieve, and we don't fall into the stereotypes that non-immigrants have about us, that we're somehow lazy and nursing on the system and things like that. So my parents were very quick to instill that we do our best, that we look our best, that we show up on our best behaviors, because there certainly is going to be a spotlight on our behavior. And we always want to put the best foot forward, as my mother would say. So I feel like this is a common theme I find with other people who perhaps aren't, have parents who are immigrants, or maybe not for first generation Canadians. So.
Yeah, that model minority myth comes up so much. And my parents and I immigrated here when I was 13. And so it was very much, you're going to, when I was a child, it was like, you're going to get straight A's. Anything less than that is unacceptable because we know you have capacity for it. And then you're going to go to the equivalent of an Ivy League school, because they don't have Ivies here. But if you don't go to U of T, why did we come here? And then, you're going to med school. And so it was really interesting when I chose not to go to med school and opted for a career in public service, where it was like, you're throwing away all the things we've worked so hard for.
Don't forget, we came all the way here for you. Yeah,
very much so. And so coming back to sort of the yoga space has been my route into sort of healthcare, as opposed to going to medical school, which I knew was not for me.
Yes. I think that's great when we push back against what our parents deem as what is successful. And so I've had a whole moment with my sons. I have a 15-year-old son and a 17-year-old son who's in his last year of high school, which gives me a lot of anxiety. Just because he grew up so fast. I didn't really expect it to be this fast. Every time I think of him, I still think of 5-year-old Nathan. I can't seem to understand that Nathan is almost 18 and I need to move on. But when I look at his face, I still see 5-year-old Nathan. I still see baby Nathan. So I'm always taken back there. So he's making decisions. And my whole life, I've kind of been steering him to be an engineer, right? Like putting him in all these math courses, like all this stuff. And I think probably last year or the year before, he told me he didn't want to be I don't want to hurt your feelings, Mom, but I really don't want to be an engineer. I want to be an auto mechanic. And I was like, okay, no. I want him to be happy. He says, I want to have my own shop. I want to specialize in certain kinds of cars. Nobody's doing that here in Windsor. It's, it has a big market other places in the province, but I want to bring that kind of excellence and technology to Windsor. And I want to be the one to run my garage and all these kinds of things. And I was like, well, how can I not be proud of that? I'm an entrepreneur. He's been seeing that his entire existence. I quit my corporate job to start my own business so that I could have my own schedule and be there for my children on my own time and not have to ask somebody else for time off. And so that was really important to me. And so I've modeled that behavior. So how can I be surprised when he's like, no, I want to be my own boss. I want to be an entrepreneur. And I was just like, oh, okay. So it flipped really quickly. And now I'm doing everything in my power to make that available for him. So I love it that you spoke to your parents and they didn't take it well, I assume, because I didn't take it well. At first, I didn't outwardly express that to him because I already know he's going to have childhood trauma, but let me not add to it unnecessarily. So I was just like, I'm going to just smile and go, that's great, honey. There's lots of careers in the trades. I'm just going to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. And I just go to the bathroom and cry for 5 minutes. And then, touch up my makeup and come back out and go, okay, so what are the steps that we need to do to get you on the path, right? So
that's really lovely of you. My parents were definitely not happy when I was like, nope, I'm not finishing this pre-med program. Instead, I opted for a degree in human sexuality, which sort of gives me my activism roots. But they were just like, what do you do with that in the real world? And I
Oh, dear.
appreciate that, as my parents, they wanted me to be happy in the ways that they knew would generate happiness, where I would sort of be able to generate an income that keeps me in the lifestyle that they've accustomed me to. It's taken a while
You
for me
get
to
it.
build that empathy for
Yeah,
them to sort of
you get it.
understand where they were coming from. But I think I've, done well enough. I've maintained the lifestyle they accustomed me to without any hardships. I think it worked out okay.
And they're now very proud of you, our daughter, right?
Well,
Well,
I gave them enough stories to leverage in the community because that's also part of it,
oh,
right? Like, how do we
okay.
keep face when, everyone else's
Yes.
kids are engineers and doctors and lawyers and you work for the government? Like, that's not very shiny.
Oh, yeah,
So I gave
yeah.
them enough good stories to take into the world. Like, the next time you're at that dinner party and someone else is, raving about how great their kid is, I was like, here's the story you tell. And,
Nice.
you can talk about how I'm improving community health without being trapped in a system that is falling apart. You can talk about how
Yes.
I empower my students with preventative tools as opposed to waiting for them to get sick and then patching the problem together. You can talk
Yeah.
about how my work supports palliative care, which is not an area that this system really does very much in.
No.
And you can talk about how I work with, holistically across body, breath, and mind, which most specialists are not trained to
You
do.
do,
So I was like,
yeah, do
here's all
not
the
do.
good stuff you can tell people.
And you can say that your daughter is a pioneer in this work, that she is, you know what I mean? Like all the things
Yeah.
that you've said, we haven't heard in the Canadian medical or health system. And
Hmm.
I'm so excited to talk to you about that. So tell me your journey. Like, what made you say, okay, I'm not going to med school for this particular thing. I do have community care at heart because I really believe that
Hmm.
community care, activism, and our own personal self well being is the key, right, to a
Hmm.
healthy population and to changing the systems of oppression that keep
Hmm.
us from thriving and the systems of oppression that tell lies about who we are as a people.
Yeah. So I'm really lucky in that I grew up in a family of people who are very much understanding of the value of community health. My
Nice.
grandparents, both sets, were refugees from when India was partitioned by colonial powers. And so I've seen the lived impact of what that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing has on multiple generations of my family. But
Mm-hmm.
they also rallied and they, picked up their whole lives and moved to two different countries and restarted all kinds of systems. My grandmothers were on committees that built schools and hospitals. And so I sort of have a lineage to carry now to be like, we built, you
Yes.
have to continue. Don't fall
Yes.
down on this stuff. And my parents have done
Yeah.
the same thing. I mean, they picked up their whole lives and moved here
Yep.
in their 40s, which I can't imagine picking
Oh.
up my whole life at that stage and moving halfway across the world without a support system and then rebuilding from scratch. So
In your
I'm in
40s at
awe.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
like that's
Because lots of
I.
people are looking towards retirement, right? Not to
Hmm.
start
Yeah.
again. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
so that was also to sort of watch them do that, and to watch them rebuild a community where they didn't have one was really instructive to me in the importance of not only building sustainable community, but then maintaining them that way. And that goes
Wow.
beyond sort of that sense of, oh, but we're friends. It's your community is responsible for you, even when they don't agree with you, right?
Right.
So that piece I think is really interesting to think about.
I
And so
love
we
that.
use principles of yoga. I mean, my granddad taught yogic philosophy. I remember when I was a kid, students would come to our house and literally sit at his feet and learn from him.
Oh.
Yeah, so that and like my grandmother's taught me how to chant, which is a really important part of yoga therapy. You don't really see it very much in sort of corporate yoga spaces, as it were, because it's
Mm-hmm.
not sexy to be chanting things. And so those practices were always a part of my life. The movement practice came a little bit later. So when I was 13 and we moved to Canada, I was dealing with a lot of anxiety
Mm-hmm.
over sort of picking up my whole life, moving to a place where, culture and all of the other pieces. I already was living with chronic pain as a kid from lots of joint issues, which I think actually runs in my family, but no one ever got a diagnosis for it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that was really something to negotiate. And then I also developed an eating disorder, as you do as a teen in the late 90s, early 2000s, with all of the fun diet culture pieces. So my dad was like, okay, we
Yes.
need something so you can reconnect with your body in a way that feels safe. And
Yeah.
yoga was, what we did anyway. So he signed me up for a seniors yoga class. He says he didn't know it was for seniors. He just saw
Oh,
yoga. And
Fair
so I
enough.
walked into a room of 75 and 80-year-olds as a
Okay.
13-year-old, and they were like, "What is happening? Why are you lost?" But the
Yeah.
instructor was like, "No, you're on my sheet, so I guess you can stay." And it was really
Yeah.
lovely just to move and feel at home in my body and to watch people
Mm,
who were at, a very different stage of life feeling also like really safe and comfortable in their own bodies. And I was like, I want that. When I'm that age, I
right?
want that. I want to feel like
Yeah.
that. And so that's where my practice started. And then I, of course, as a very high achieving person, was like, this feels good. I should do more of it. And so injured myself in my 20s doing
Ouch.
yoga.
Yep. Hello, been there. Yes,
Yeah,
right there with you.
I think that's most yoga teachers that I know actually, who are like, we hurt ourselves doing this and then we learned to teach it so we wouldn't do that to ourselves.
100%. Or some of us look out in a yoga class and don't see anybody that looks like us and
Hmm.
decide, what's going on here and how can I change this? And let me create a
Hmm.
space where people who look like me feel comfortable to come. Let me model I feel you as a high achieving kid and individual the same way. How can I make this just more for more people?
Yeah. And so I signed up for a teacher training initially selfishly to be like, how do I not injure myself the next time? And in the
Yeah.
training was really concerned about the strong asana focus and not so much any of the
Yeah.
other 8 limbs. Whereas like,
Yeah.
there's more to this. I was also sort of one of 3 people of color in an audience of 30. Which I was like, this is
Wow.
also a problem where most of
Yes.
these people are sort of dancers with injuries who are just going to keep teaching some version of gymnastics because that's the
Yes.
focus here. So that was really concerning. And then,
Mm.
yeah, I had a lot of problems with the way sort of the teaching was going. And I was chatting with my mentor. And also, my other concern was how do I walk into a room of 50 people who I don't know, tell them all to do the same thing, and expect them to get a good result?
Right. Yeah, that's the big one.
There's
Yeah.
terrified of the liability of coming out of that, where I was like, if someone injures themselves, that's my fault because I
Yeah.
didn't do enough due diligence. And I'm trusting that they will know what to tell me so I can adapt for them, where most people are so disconnected from their
They
bodies
don't
that
even
there's no way
know.
they're going to know that.
Yeah, they're
And
not even
so
gonna know.
from there, I was chatting with my mentor about all the discomfort I was feeling with the work. And she was like, you should be a yoga therapist. You clearly want to work one on one. You want to solve problems for people using these really great tools and using all of them, not just movement.
Mhm.
So you should
Right.
invest some more and go be a yoga therapist. And so I did. It took a little bit of convincing, but it's been really, really great to build that perspective, but then also to learn through my training as a therapist that we integrate really well into the healthcare system,
Mm-hmm.
right? We can work really closely with physicians, with physiotherapists, with
Yes.
chiropractors, with osteopaths, and build complementary ways of empowering our students to take
Mm-hmm.
care of themselves as opposed to being reliant on other people who claim to have expertise in their bodies that they don't have because they're not in those bodies.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point that you make. And I remember when I owned my yoga studio, one of my students and very good friends right now, we ended up growing a really great relationship, had a genetic limitation in her body where she is in a wheelchair, where she can't stand up and walk, where she has very limited use of her arms and legs. And she sent every yoga studio in the city at a time an email saying, listen, I know that this could be beneficial to me. Am I able to come to your class? And no one
Mm,
got back to her except
mm,
me. And at the time I had taken a lot of training because I'm like, okay, I need to figure this out for people who don't have use with their legs. I need to figure this out
mm,
for people who aren't going to be doing this super athletic yoga that seemed to be
mm,
the benchmark for everyone. And the whole time I was in super athletic yoga, in my late teens, early 20s, all the way into my 30s, if I'm being honest, all the way up to my 40s. But that's my practice for me.
mm,
That's not what I want to teach others, right? And
mm,
so it just occurred to me, how does this person get left out of the yoga space? With at the heart of the
mm,
philosophy of yoga is community care, right? Is
mhm,
being in relationship with other people, is
mhm,
providing a space where no harm comes, providing a space
mhm,
that feels comfortable. And I think it's interesting how that kind of parallels your story of stepping into a space in seniors yoga, being the youngest person in that class and
mhm,
watching people at different stages in their life make the same connections. And I thought
mhm,
that could be true for people with disabilities. I thought that could be true for anybody who has ever
Mm-hmm.
felt like they've been excluded, and for everybody who has ever been historically excluded from certain spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a brilliant realization to come to pretty early on in life.
Yeah, and I love that you sort of brought up the idea that yoga is about being in relationship. And
Yeah.
that notion of sort of being in good relationship with yourself first, so being in good
Yes.
relationship with your body, with your breath, with your mind, then translates into being in good relationship with your community and with your environment, which is another thing I love that we never talk about, is sort of
Yeah.
how yoga pertains to our like literal environments that we occupy and how that plays into things like truth and reconciliation here in Canada. Right? We are in
Still
relationship
waiting for
with this
that.
land.
Still waiting for that. Yeah.
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 But it's things like that. Like, how are we in relationship with the stewards of this land? How are we supporting or empowering or doing whatever it is we have capacity for to reconcile all of the harm that has been done, whether we were directly involved in it or just benefit from the results of it?
Exactly.
How are we in better relationship? And I think that's a really beautiful perspective to bring to places like public service.
Yes, very much so. I think it's like not only beautiful but necessary. How
Mm.
can we be so disconnected from this experience when we are literally in this experience, whether we've created it or we've benefited it from? And this reminds me of something my dad said to me as a first generation Canadian. I think I was a teenager and I was writing a paper for some class. I was talking about the horrific things that have happened to Indigenous folks and First Nations folks here in Canada, like the most horrific things. And I made the comment, I used the word we in the comment. And my
Mm.
dad just shut down the comment right away. He said, there is no we in this statement. You are an
Mm.
immigrant. You had your whole other history of being
Mhm.
part of enslavement, of being part of the human trafficking that was the transatlantic slave trade. Where
Mhm.
I'm from was the hub of that for Britain
Mm.
in particular. And so he says, this is not our battle to fight. Like, this is not
Mm.
on you to solve. And at that time, I didn't have the information or the language to then turn back and say to him, that might be true. My people
Mhm.
weren't a part of this because my people were struggling somewhere else.
Mhm.
However, now that I'm here, I'm benefiting from it.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that wasn't a conversation I could have with him at 16 because I didn't understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it's still not really a conversation I can have with my parents who are sort of carrying all this weight of, being the children of refugees, of restarting their lives over and over. It's difficult to bring things up like reconciliation and the fact that like we should be paying rent to live on this land. Like we owe reparations, whether
We
we were the
do.
people doing the colonizing or colonized folks from other places, right? How do we not
Yes.
continue that cycle of harm? But it's a difficult conversation to have with people who have not yet resolved the first round of trauma to then take
Yeah.
on responsibility. So
Yeah.
yeah, that work of being in relationship and just being present in our bodies and fully experiencing what it's like, I think is
Mhm.
really also another big part of the work. And so
I
it's an
agree. I
interesting
agree.
space.
It is an interesting space. And I think if you are practicing all 8 limbs of the yoga, not the one limb that we like to practice all the time or be hyper focused on anyway, these things make sense. And these things
Mhm.
filter into your consciousness a little bit faster than those of us who are like, I'm really trying to land that handstand in the middle of the room. Like, cause that's really important because that's what's going to make me more connected to the world. And that's what's going to make me a better practitioner of yoga.
Yeah.
So when
I mean,
everything, yeah,
Instagram
sure,
yoga
it's
has its
fun.
place, right? Like learning to balance in the center of the room forces a level of body awareness that can be really useful. And I'm not knocking that practice at all. It has its place. I've done it. I teach people how to do it. But I think the other 7 limbs have a role.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, these things are fun, and quite frankly, in a world where we've been constantly taught to hate on our bodies, or that
Mhm.
our bodies need to be a project that we're constantly improving upon, with that sentiment of the hustle, mentality,
Mm.
which adds to me, which links for me personally the need to do a handstand in the middle of the room comes from that.
Mm.
If I hustle and if I work really hard
Yeah.
all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time, I'm going to land this. Not necessarily, actually, not
Mhm.
necessarily. And so I think that's for me kind of the disconnect. I don't think there's anything wrong with being able to do those kinds of things in your body. It just has to be more than that. That can't be the only goal. And what are the messages that you're missing in the journey to that particular sense of balance in the room, right? Is it performative, which often we see social justice work and activism work can be? Is it performative? Or is it like, okay, I learned what it's like to be in the struggle. Now I can see the struggle of others and I'm there to show up for them in a way. Like, but I really think it's not the latter. I think it's the former. Look at me, look at me, look at me.
Yes. Yes. Because so much, I think also part of the work of yoga is sort of coming to that sense of I decide what's important for me. The fact that I value myself is worth more than other people's valuation of me. And that's really hard to do in this culture that is so focused on all the external performance pieces, right?
Yes.
You know, how flexible are you in that Instagram photo? How many articles did you publish? What other weirdo success marker defines your worth? And I think the work of sort of, I mean, asana is great so that you can sit comfortably and do that inner focused work to come to a place where your valuation of yourself is worth more than anyone else's. And,
yes,
you know, as a high achiever, hustle culture really checked boxes for me where I was like, oh yeah, all the things that I can show that I can do. And then I was like, but no one actually cares that I can do these things. Like literally no one. I've burned myself out doing it.
Yes.
And now I'm in more pain than I've ever been in. You know, I'm having a really hard time managing my mental health. And what good came, no good came out of this that I can actually see. And I was joking with a yoga therapy colleague where I was like, the first 2 years of my training, I was like, all I did was learn how to rest. Because I realized I didn't know how. And rest is the first principle of yoga therapy. And I was like, I can't offer people this tool if I don't actually know it. And so I spent 2 years reclaiming my capacity for rest, which has been hugely important for my ability to run this business now and maintain a career in public service. Is that capacity for rest.
That's amazing. And I think people really look at rest, maybe less so that we've had a collective trauma, AKA the pandemic, and a lot of people had to kind of dial back a lot of things because things were open. We didn't have access to a lot of things. So hopefully people taking some time to breathe was important. But the fact that you have to tell people to rest and that being chronically tired is not a place that is helpful for any of us. And when we look at social justice work, when we look at community care work, for me anyway, it's done on a continuum. If I'm exhausted and burnt out and tired and feeling, questioning my access to my mental health, not maybe able to move my body for chronic pain, I'm less likely to show up in community for others. I'm less likely to have the energy to want to fight the good fight. I'm going to be in my bed, trying to make it through. But if I take that time for rest, and if I schedule that time for rest, and if I take that community care literally in community, if I look out to my friends and say, listen, I'm struggling, or if I go and see a therapist listening, I'm struggling, I have all that access to care and intentional well-being that fortifies my soul and my body. And then I have the energy to be looking out into the world and seeing where can I better, use my energy to create equitable spaces wherever I am. And these two things for me are on a continuum.
Yeah. And it's, I love that you're at a place where you're like, yeah, it doesn't have to be 100% all of the time.
It can't be. It's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. And you can't be part of every cause. As much as I would love to be a part of every cause and platforming every cause and doing what I can for every cause, it burns me out and it overwhelms me because then it's always one thing after another. Like it's always the next thing is coming, the next big crisis is coming, and then you don't have the bandwidth to be doing anything, to be honest. Not anything with any kind of skill has been my experience.
Yeah. And with any sort of sustainability, right? Because if you're going to start, I'm the kind of, I like to finish what I start. I have a really hard time stopping in the middle, even if everything else is sort of falling apart around me. If I commit to something, I'm the kind of person that will stay the course,
Stay the course.
which is, I mean, helpful in some ways, but also not great in other ways. And
Right.
so one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is what other forms of energy can I put into things? Because
Ah,
yes, I can
yeah.
show up, in person and put in the elbow grease and, lift the boxes and move the things. I can do that. But I can also, at this stage of my life, throw some money at the problem and let other people do that really well. Or I
Yeah.
can connect them with other resources. So that's been another piece of the work that I've been thinking about is what other sort of energetic resources can I bring to the space? If I can't personally show up and, write the letters or knock on the doors or like do the things, what else can I do?
Yeah. That's brilliant. And that was one of the things that I learned very early on in my yoga business when I was going to make this practice part of my sustaining my life, right? I'm
Mhm.
coming to work. I want to do this work. I love to do this work. I think I'm fairly good at this work, but I also need to be compensated because I have a mortgage and I have
Yes.
young children and I have a car. Like this
Mhm.
is the state of the world. This is how world works. So I'm going to have to be paid for my time at the end of the day, as much as this is a passion project and something that I love and something that is necessary. I also need to be paid. Like I also need to
Mhm.
have that also as a reason to continue. And that was one thing that was really interesting to me in this space is the amount of people who want to take advantage of your years of education, your years of trauma in which have educated you and not pay you for your time and energy, almost as if to say, yeah, we need you, but it's not as valuable as these 50, 70, $80 yoga pants, or it's not as valuable as, taking care of your community isn't quite as valuable as selling your community expensive yoga pants.
Oh yeah.
That's a
No, my
struggle.
favorite is when people are like, "Oh, but you're of East Indian background. This is just your
Uh-huh.
culture. You should give it to us
Mm-hmm.
for free." And I was like, "Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so what does that say about the hundreds of thousands of dollars that I've spent over the course of my lifetime learning to do all of this? It didn't
Yeah,
arrive for free. It's not something
ever.
I imbibed with breast milk. So,
Right.
I paid for this. You should pay for this too."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's really interesting occupying that space. Or my other favorite thing is, oh, well, you're South Asian, but you don't look like a yoga teacher.
What does that mean?
I've had this where I've walked into studios and
What
it's
does that
been
mean?
everything from like my adult students to at one point I taught a class and a woman brought her daughter to the studio. Her daughter didn't take the class. She was about 9 or 10. And I finished
Okay.
teaching and I stepped out of the room and her daughter looked up and said, "Oh, are you leaving class early?" And I said, "No, I'm the teacher. I taught the class." And she looked at me, this 9-year-old, and said, "Well, you don't look like a yoga teacher." And I was just like, if anyone looks like a yoga teacher, it's me.
No
Like,
kidding. Like, please, again, tell me what that even means. Isn't that amazing, right? It isn't.
yeah.
It's also hurtful, and it's also sad that
Yeah.
we've created this imagery, and it's been my whole yoga career has been about breaking down that stereotype
Mhm.
and trying to remind folks that there's another 7 limbs that we're
Yeah.
completely not looking at. Okay, yeah, asana is great, and asana, being proprioception and flexibility and being able to be flexible in your body helps you be flexible in your mind, because I've seen that. I've seen the stiffer your body, the more closed your mind seems to be.
Mm.
I've seen that. I've seen
Yeah.
that firsthand, where I'm like, okay, oh, you changed. What happened? Oh, you went to yoga, and my body
Mm.
got more flexible. Therefore, my point of view
Mm.
expanded. And I was just like, wow, well, keep going, because
Mhm.
we need a broader point of view for everybody. But honest to
Mhm.
God, it is so hurtful, especially from a person whose culture this actually is. But I am tired of the narrative that there's nobility in poverty, and somehow
Mm.
that the more poor you are, the more we get to take advantage of you, because the teachings just to be for free. I went to the University of Windsor and I had to pay a tuition. I
Mhm.
was taught ancient modalities. I was taught ancient practices. I believe mathematics has been around for
Mhm.
thousands of years, and people get paid to be math profs. Last time I
Mhm.
checked, psychology has been around for hundreds of years. Psychology professors are still getting paid to teach that. These are ancient
Mhm.
lessons that I took an undergrad in history, which I would like my tuition back for that, because I've had to unlearn a whole bunch of stuff and relearn new stuff on my own, because
Mm-hmm.
the history I was taught steeped in colonization, not actually truth. Those people get paid for telling ancient stories. Why
Mm-hmm.
can't we
Yeah.
have a sustainable well-being? Because if we can't sustain ourselves, we can't help you.
Mm-hmm.
This
Yeah.
whole thing that you should just
Like,
show up for free is amazing to
yeah.
me.
My house is not free. My tuition was
I
not free.
wish.
Financial well-being is one of the 8 aspects of well-being. So the notion that my intentional well-being and my self-care would not include my financial well-being or my occupational well-being seems really bizarre to me.
Me too. Seems a way yet again to take advantage of a culture
Mm-hmm.
of a people whose culture we actually use to apply wealth to our own selves, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're a yoga teacher. I'm going to take what you're learning and apply it to my life, but you shouldn't be paid for that.
Yeah.
It's an
No, all
interesting
of this should
concept.
just be for free. In which case, I'm like, you
Yeah,
know what? The internet is relatively free. All of
for
this
sure.
stuff is available on the internet. And if not,
You can
there's
even go to the
probably a public
library.
library that you can access,
I'm just saying,
which
you can even
also
go to the
has this
library
information available for free. So please continue your free learning journey out there.
without me. Yeah, without me.
Yes.
It's fine. I'm not at all offended. Take your stuff and go.
Yeah,
I
I'm
know.
happy to curate that experience for you because that comes at a cost. If you're really like, if
Yes.
there is a financial barrier to you accessing this,
That's a
then I'm
different
just not the
story.
teacher for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, that's a different story. I can put you along the path. You can do this work yourself. And whenever I do offer this work, if I do it over a weekend, I offer a
Mm.
community-based session for two
Mhm.
hours, like on a Friday night. Pay what you can. Let's have a conversation. If you're looking for the
Mhm.
deeper dive, this is a lot of work for me. This doesn't happen overnight for me. And if it has happened overnight for me, it's only because I've been doing it for 25 years.
Mhm.
So, right? It's
Yes.
amazing to me that we don't look at, when we're looking at intentional well-being, that we're not looking at all those
Mhm.
things. I love that you made mention of that. I love that you made mention of financial well-being, well-being
Mhm.
within your job, well-being within your body, like the whole
Mhm.
picture. People seem to think it's only about moving your body.
Yeah, no, these are all connected pieces because if my financial health is not in a good place, that stresses
Yeah.
me out, which then, shows up in my relationships with myself and with everyone else. It's really, I'm not a fun person to be around when I'm stressed about money. And I'm very
Yeah. Oh
rarely
yeah.
stressed about it, but it's a
Yeah.
real thing. And I know how it impacts everything else because, my jaw gets tight and then I end up with a headache, which means I'm less present in every single conversation. So it's just better for everyone if people get
Yeah.
paid fairly for what they're doing.
I don't think it's an unreasonable ask, quite frankly. I'm grateful that we live in Canada, and I think more people believe that way than don't.
Mm.
However, we are highly influenced by the shenanigans that are going on across the border. And those
Mm.
things creep across the border and show up in our lives in a way that is terrifying. And when I look at the state of the world, I always have to catch myself, because I have children, 15 and 17-year-old boys, that I'm not constantly, the world is going to shit.
Mm.
It's a dumpster fire. Because what is the message I'm imparting on them?
Mm.
How am
Yes.
I affecting their well-being by being the person who's like, throw up my hands and give up? Because some days it feels like that.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. There are days where I'm like, you know what? I just need to turn everything off and take a nap. It's like hitting the power button on my computer. I know it'll restart. It probably will restart with the same issue, but I will have rested and hopefully whatever like delightful internal mechanism would have solved the problem. But I feel that way about the world too, where like I can't hit a restart button, but I'm going to take a nap and then come at this with a different perspective and remember
Yeah.
that I have friends and colleagues across the globe who are working to make this a healthier, more inclusive environment for folks. And sometimes it's a matter of reaching out to those people and being like, so how are
What's
you
going
dealing
on?
with this?
Yeah.
Because
What's going on for
I've
you?
run out of options in my own toolbox. Is there
Yeah.
something from yours that I can borrow for a little bit? And then when you need
Yes.
something, I will offer you one myself.
I think that's gorgeous and beautiful. I think that's a great tip for intentional well-being. One, when you are completely overwhelmed by the state of the world, let's just shut everything down. There's certain things that you probably have to do that are time sensitive, that you need to get off your plate, but do what is only required and necessary. So I call it the bare minimum. and then take a nap so that you can come back and be in a good space to do perhaps more than the bare minimum. But we expect 100% from everybody 100% of the time, even if you're feeling 30% available for that task.
Yeah. That's the other thing I'm pretty intentional about telling people where I'm at on any given day, because I live with chronic pain and I live with, an eating disorder, which really can throw things off for me if I'm not having a good day or a good week. It's as simple as, hey, I agreed to this. I'm not in a place right now where I can do the 6 things.
Deliver.
I can do one thing exceptionally well, like at the level we're used to receiving it at. I could do 3 things with some competency. I can do all 6 things, but they're going to be awful. What would you like? If you want 6 awful things, I'll give you 6 awful things.
Easily done.
Or you can have one really awesome thing, and then I'm going to rest for a bit.
Oh yeah, that's brilliant. And what does that look like for you in your career? How do you you just say that, you model that, what happens?
I literally say that. I've walked into job interviews, and one of the first things I've told the people interviewing me, and this is always fun to do in public service, where I'm like, look, I'm happy to disclose that I live with a chronic pain condition and I live with a mental health condition, and I have really good systems and practices of care. But that means that I will work the hours that I'm contracted to work. If you need me to work overtime, I need advance notice so I can manage my other care pieces. Also, I'm completely transparent in the fact that I run a business outside of my 9 to 5. Yeah. And I have responsibilities to those folks too. So if you're expecting me to start earlier or stay later, I need notice so that I can plan around that. But also, I'm going to tell you when these conditions are acting up. And as an employer, you have a duty to support me. And I'm going to be really clear about what I need in terms of that support. If that's not okay with you, or if that's not the kind of job this is, then let's not continue the process.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. I just got taken back to my accounting gig, wishing that I could have said all those things. When I work in accounting, the expectation is you stay till it balances. And you'll stay till it's done. And I've spent many, many, many a night working way past my, my 7 to 3 shift, being there, 12 and 15 hours, because that's the expectation of my boss. And at the time I was in my 20s, I had no children, and I was fine to do it. Right. Cause I'm a get up in the morning kind of person and get my physical activity on. And at the end of the day, I would go home and probably watch TV. So it made no bit of difference, but then people take advantage of that. Yeah. Were you always that way, or did something trigger that?
I think part of it is, the luxury of being a geriatric millennial.
Is that a term?
It's a term that people have been using lately, as we are the oldest of the millennials now.
Okay, I've heard it. I didn't realize. Yeah.
And so I was just like, you know what? I'm okay with being a geriatric millennial. I'm going to own this.
I'm a Gen Xer, so you're over here with me. I would have called you an Xtennial because you're the oldest. So you kind of straddle both of those generations. But geriatric works too. I mean, I say to each their own, however you want to identify.
If it means I'm one step closer to retirement and I can be old and grumpy, then I'm going to own the old and grumpy when it serves me.
At it.
But one of the things has been, I graduated into a recession. There were no jobs to be had. And so as we're going through sort of this next round of recession, I'm just like, wait, I've been here. I survived that. So you know what? I know my employer will not always be there for me. I get that. I get that it's a job and I'm a number on a list and I don't actually have any real, human value to them. So how much am I really going to pour into an organization that, quite frankly, is not going to think twice before surplusing me or otherwise deciding this is not the job I'm going to have? Right. And part of that has been coming from a place where there was no work to be had anyway. So I had to figure out what I was doing with my life and how I was going to sustain the, extravagant lifestyle that my parents have accustomed me to.
I love that you can name that and own that. That's one thing I appreciate about your generation more so. I think for us Gen Xers, we were very much caught up in what our baby boomer parents, if you have baby boomer parents, my parents are the generation before the boomers. I think they're called the silent generation, perhaps. So my parents are not boomers. So I think it's just really exciting that you have that wherewithal or that perception, whereas I think we had a lot of stuff left over from the previous generation, where you work when you're sick, you push it to the line, and if you should happen to be let go by no fault of your own, it was somehow your fault and you better have a job. But those generations also came to be at a time where things were abundant. You could quit your job in the morning and have a new job by the afternoon. Those things aren't happening and haven't been happening for quite some time. And then really coming off of a war where everything was destroyed. So there's an opportunity to do whatever you want with minimal education.
Yeah.
Right. You could learn on the job. You could learn on the job, right? You could, and if you were doing something that was in the trades, you could get your papers as you go, which I think is a lot of places where apprenticeship kind of, gets its history from, where it's like, well, we don't have time for you to go and take this training. You're going to learn. You're here now. We're going to put you to work. You're going to work with so-and-so, and you're going to learn as we go. That hasn't happened in decades.
Yeah. It is definitely not true for my generation. It's not going to be true for anyone who comes after me.
No.
Yeah, to sort of arrive into an economic space where, we're carrying all of the student debt. There's no way I can afford any real sort of equity. It's just like, I'm going to have to figure it out. These systems are not going to be here for me. They're already mostly broken. We're going to patch them together as best we can, which is why sort of public service called to me, because I was like, these are the big systems that influence everyone's life. Education, healthcare, transportation. Like, these are the basic tools that we use to alleviate things like poverty. So how can I go in there and I have a not so secret mission? It's not so secret because I keep telling my colleagues this is what I want, even though it's not actually my job, is to build a healthier organization from the inside so that the systems and structures we build and maintain are healthier for everyone that we serve.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So you're almost like covert in these spaces.
Yeah, secret operative, trying to make everyone feel better so that the things we build are better.
Oh, I mean, that's a brilliant way to look at the world. And I'm hoping there's a community of people who are doing these things, right? How did you come to establish this? Like, who are your co-conspirators? How does this work? I'm intrigued. You've opened a door that I've never even considered.
So there's an amazing community of mindfulness practitioners in the organization that I work in. And we've all recognized through our own sort of not great health experiences being in a corporate space that we can choose to, set some boundaries and ask for some accommodations and use the tools that we have in the systems that we're in to make healthier spaces for ourselves. And we've seen the impact that has on our performance, which also then improves organizational health. And so there's this beautiful sort of grassroots kind of piece where, if we are the grass that is supporting the tree, if we are not strong, that tree will fall over. It's doing that work. And that includes having really serious conversations about what oppression looks like inside the organization. Like what it is like for folks of color to be in, serially administrative roles and never progress in their careers. How does that impact their health? How does that impact the teams that they're on? How do we help move those pieces so that they're contributing in the way that is best suited for them and that the organization is benefiting and we have better lived experience narrative that informs the systems and structures that we build? Because, yes, I show up to my public service job, but I bring all of the experiences I've had outside of that. Like, my lived experience in community informs the lens on my work. And that is so both on the health side of like just making healthier employees, but also engaging them in their communities so that they actually understand the lived experience as they're building the systems and structures that contribute to those.
Wow. Can I give you a hand?
I never say no to applause.
I'm giving her, for those of you who are listening and maybe not watching the video on YouTube, I am giving Naya round of applause because I have never heard that narrative before, which is why I wanted to have you on the podcast, right? Especially working here in Canada, especially now that we're watching our public health kind of crumble. My husband and I have been having this whole conversation, but that's what happens with years and years and years and years of underfunding and defunding these programs. All of a sudden, these programs start to fall apart, and somehow the Canadian public are the reason these things are happening, not the government systems who have been put in place and given have been given the responsibility to care for these organizations and continue to defund and defund and defund and defund. And then when we defund, we slide into these ideas. Well, it's not really working. Maybe we should have a private tiered system. That's not how that works. Okay. You've defunded the system in the hopes that this is going to be the answer. And so now we bring in the private sector. Here comes my political science degree. Then we bring in the private sector because they can do it better or whatever. And you don't address what you've done to make sure that this organization has become unstable. And the amount of problems and trauma you cause for people working within the system, right? There's a reason all these folks are burnt out. And a lot of it has to do with underfunding and lack of support by the people in charge. Should I get off my soapbox?
I mean, I love that soapbox. It's not one I can stand on personally, given my employment obligations, but I appreciate that there is an awareness of these conversations, and they need to continue happening, because what I think people don't realize is that once you privatize something, you can't go back.
No, it's true.
You can't claim it back as a public entity, and so once we go there, there's no
going back. Yeah,
which is very scary.
It's very scary, and it is the cornerstone of our democracy. Care and action is the cornerstone of our democracy. It's one of the things that makes me proud to be Canadian. There's lots of things I'm not proud of that this country has done, and regardless where you live in the world, that's going to happen. I always like to remind people it's not all or nothing. Like two truths can be true at the same time, right? We can have that. These things can function at the same time. There's lots of things that I appreciate about Canada, and there's a lot of things that I'm deeply embarrassed about Canada. But one of those things I've always been proud of is the fact that we care about our population, and that we intentionally care about our population through social service programs that are not, as the States always likes to say, entitlements. These are things we pay for as Canadian taxpayers and as citizens. These are things that we have to remind the government that these are not entitlements, that we have paid into these things. And we expect, when we give you our tax dollars, and when I have to pay my taxes every year, I like to lay on the floor and cry, because it's always, and I also tell myself, you're paying a lot of taxes because you're successful. So this is your, you know, you didn't become successful on your own. This is you giving back because, you know, people have helped you get successful. So the very least you can do is pay your fair share into the pot. So these same people have the same access to things as you do. And that's how we're intentional about our well-being. That's how we're intentional about our well-being and community care, right?
Yeah. And I think the other real intentionality piece is being actively engaged in the processes that ensure that we maintain these systems. Like, I don't know about you, but the number of people I talk to, we just had municipal elections here in this province. It has the lowest voter turnout rate of any election. And consistently does. And I know at one point, sort of my generation was the great hope, because it's like, oh, there's so many of them, then they'll all show up to vote and we'll be able to make changes. The number of my peers and colleagues that I've talked to are like, well, what difference does it make? And that blows my mind, because this is sort of one of the levers of access to power that you have as a citizen, is to show up and vote, and then to demand accountability over the 4-year cycle from the people who got elected, whether you elected them or not. You have the right to ask them to be accountable for things that are important to you and to your community. So whether that's, and I mean, food security is really important to me, and I don't love food banks. I appreciate that they are a Band-Aid solution to a hemorrhaging situation. But, you know, that's a question to ask your elected representatives at every level of government. What are you doing to improve access to community spaces? What are you doing to improve access to transportation? What are you doing to address food deserts? What are you doing to address affordable housing? And they owe you a response because you employ them.
You elected them.
Like, you are their
them.
employer.
Exactly.
They owe you a response. And if you're not satisfied, it is for you to continue to ask questions. And maybe next time, if you were not satisfied, don't elect them.
Don't vote for them. Yes. I'm going to give you snaps for that, because people need to hear that. People are, I know the system seems broken, or there is this, I always think there's this propaganda to tell everybody, oh, well, if you don't vote, it doesn't really matter. And I often like to remind people that people have died for your right to vote. Especially if you are living in a Black or Brown or Indigenous body. People had to really push to get their right to vote. And so it's the bare minimum we can do to participate in democracy is to show up every 2 or 4 years and wherever your elections are to show up for community care, because we are deciding who gets to make the decisions for all of us. And it's really, as a political scientist, and I use that term lightly as a person who took a political science degree, I have learned that unfortunately, or fortunately, it's about compromise. As long as we all are mostly happy and somewhat disappointed, like all of us at the same time, we've done the right thing, right? Like, and then people are like, everybody sucks on the ticket or everybody sucks on the ballot. And I'm like, pick the people who are representing your own best interests and don't vote against your own best interests, which I see happen in America all the time. And I don't want us to pick up that habit here, that we are not voting in our own best interests. We're voting for some reason to have numbers on whatever things. You need to look about what is important in your communities and to know that intentional well-being is political, because you vote for what happens in your community. You vote for where grocery stores go. You vote for where public park and like municipal elections. This is the most tangible one for you. You're deciding what is happening in your actual community. And if you don't show up to vote, and I know here in Windsor, Essex County, you can vote over the phone. You didn't need to leave your house. You can vote on your computer. Like, let's not, you know what I mean? Let's not pretend like you're not already on Instagram. Just take that extra 10 minutes that you were going to be on Instagram and vote. Do you, and if my stylist and I talked about the election, and she was like, there were a few people on there that didn't have any information, like they didn't have a bio on their thing. And I made it a point of digging up, getting on the internet and asking people, who are these people? What have they done in our communities? What businesses did they own? And making sure that I understood who these people were before I tick the box, because I'm ultimately responsible for my community at the end of the day. And I'm always like, this is intentional community care and intentional well-being in a nutshell. And she's a woman with a platform, meaning she's in a beauty salon with tons of people in and out all day. So she gets to actually talk one-on-one to community members and say, this is what I did. I saw this person. They looked interesting to me. When I clicked on the bio on the website, there was no more information. So thank God for Google. I went in there and I dug around and found out they supported this, they supported that. And this is a person that I actually want to support, right?
Yeah, and that's so important, modeling that behavior for people, because I don't know what it was like in Windsor, but like here, races were lost by 20, 30 votes. So for anyone who's saying things like my vote doesn't count, it definitely does.
Yeah.
But it brings me back sort of to that idea of, we're responsible for community, not just our friends, but for the people we don't agree with too. Because 100%. We exist in this shared space and we all impact each other. So when you don't, and this is my soapbox, when you don't show up to vote, you really impact the realities of a lot of people, including all of the public servants who work in those spaces, who then end up maybe supporting mandates that don't make the most sense.
Yes. Again, voting against your own best interest is also not voting. It's also not voting, because there's a whole group of people who will always vote. No matter what, they show up to the polls. And those people are much older than us and have a different lived experience than us. Do we want people who don't have any idea who we are or any idea what our communities need voting for us? Is that, or making decisions for us? Is that what we want? We want people who look like us, who understand what it is to show up like this in the world. We want those folks, right? To be making decisions for all of us. I could talk to you forever as we come up on the hour. We just met. I've only been stalking you online. And when I say stalking, I mean following, liking posts, sharing, For those of you, don't at me. I'm not actually stalking anybody.
It's all consensual.
Yes, thank you. Consensual. I am in love with the work that you're doing. I am grateful that you are here in Canada to also do this work and to share. Can you give our listeners 3 intentional well-being practices that maybe you do or that you have witnessed are great for community or even individual care?
Absolutely. So my number one favorite is deeply resting. And whether that's in community or by yourself, I mean, I would love to go back to pre-pandemic times where you just show up to like a restorative yoga class, but you all just take a nap for an hour.
Oh my gosh, yes, please.
Like sanctioned napping, I think should 100% be a thing. So whether that's you deliberately booking time in your calendar to rest, or that is something you do in community, it could literally be like a virtual, we'll all just like dial into a call and take a nap. Because then you can
Oh,
say
I
you're on a
love
call
it.
for all my high
Right?
achievers out there who was like, no, I need something.
But you're on a call, but you're on a call.
Yeah, you're on a call.
I love it.
You're
Yeah.
you're doing the thing you're supposed to do on the call, which is take a nap for an hour. So some form
Oh,
of deliberate resting, whatever that looks like for
I
you.
love it.
And it doesn't have to be an hour. It could be 15 minutes, right? Like
I
whatever it
love
is.
it. I
Find
love
some sort of accessible thing that allows you to rest.
it.
Whether that's, hey kids, you're gonna draw a sleeping person. For my fellow parents who are out there who are like, I can't take a nap because they're always running around. Be their
Yes.
drawing model when you take a nap. So yeah, some form of deliberate deep resting, some
Yes.
form of focused practice. So
Mm.
whether that's chanting a mantra or candle flame meditation or whatever it is to help you maintain your focus, because we're so distracted, I find
Mm-hmm.
nowadays.
Yes.
Like I
Very.
start a sentence and then I'm scrolling on Instagram to look up a thing and then I forgot something else, so I have to go to the other room and I like don't finish the sentence.
I'm
I
glad
don't know
it's
if you
not
have this
just
problem.
me. Oh my God, I feel seen. I feel heard. This is my life
Yeah.
all the time. I have to literally turn off my phone and hide it and go stay focused on the task at hand
Yeah.
because I'm like, I really should look that up. And what time does this place open? And what did oh wait, I have stuff in the dryer. Like it's just,
Yep. And then I was like, oh, but I was trying to write a sentence. So some
right.
sort of like 2 minutes, like start with 2 minutes and work up to like 10 minutes of just focus on one thing.
Thing.
And like
Yes.
it doesn't have to be candle
Please.
flame meditation. Sometimes I spend 10 minutes watching my cat breathe while he's sleeping,
Oh, or
which is
stick your
very
face.
lovely
Oh no.
and
I
very
know.
soothing. And just like I can do that for 10 minutes. And like I'm not
Yes.
counting his breath or like making a work task out of it. I'm just watching him breathe. So
Oh, I
some sort
love
of
that.
focused practice, because it will
Mhm.
enable you to continue to focus on all the other things and maybe you can write whole sentences at a time.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm here for
and
that.
then the last thing I would say is some sort of joyful movement. And like as a
Yes.
yoga teacher, my yoga practice is mostly about what sort of movement brings me joy. And some days that's just rolling around
Mm.
on the floor. And some days it's trying to nail that handstand in the center of the room. And some days
Sure.
it's a living room dance party, right? Like
Ooh, I'm a fan
whatever.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to be a formal yoga practice, right?
Yes.
It could be whatever movement brings you joy. Maybe it's mindful walking, maybe it's getting in the pool, maybe it's playing with your kids because that's a lot of
Mm.
movement. But like
Yeah.
some sort of everyday, some sort of joyful movement practice.
Agreed. I love that. Joyful, mindful movement practice. I tell
Mhm.
people even going outside and standing on the grass, if that's available to you to do that. Like take off your shoes. Maybe not now. It's getting cold in Canada. But, or maybe now. Maybe that's something that
Mhm.
feels good in the moment. Or, running outside and jumping in a snowbank, making a couple snow angels, and then going back in the
Mhm.
house. All these things count. And I really appreciate you here out in the space, out in public service, out in community service, out in collective community care. Can you tell our listeners where we can find you, how we can connect with you? I know you do a lot of one-on-one counseling
Mhm.
and coaching. I would love, and don't worry, everybody, these will be in the show notes, but how do we get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So probably the best way is through my website, which is holisticyogatherapy.ca. And there's booking links in there and all kinds of fun stuff that you can explore. Outside of that, I'm on Instagram at Holistic Yoga Therapist. So therapy for the website, therapist for Instagram. Or if you're a big LinkedIn user, you can find me on LinkedIn under my name, which is Naya Bajaj. So those three avenues of access, any of them will work. All of them have connections to my email. If you'd prefer to work over email, we can do that too. But yeah, I look forward to connecting with really anyone who's curious or wants to chat more about all of the things we touched on.
Which is amazing. We covered a lot today. You've said so much and you've been so inspirational in having me reframe a few things that I've been struggling with. So I feel like this whole conversation was really a therapy session for me. So I appreciate appreciate you so much. I'm grateful that you're in this space, and I'm grateful that we finally got the time to connect, that the universe lined everything up and it all came to be in this space. I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Naya so much for coming on the podcast, for continuing to be so gracious with your patience. And please get in touch. And if you aren't following her on Instagram, please follow her on Instagram. We will link to her Instagram and social media pages in the notes. You will often find that I share her content on my page because I like my page to be about community and not just about me making coffee or doing yoga or whatever it is I'm doing during the day, but that I'm actually platforming the people who are doing the work in community. Thank you so much for being a part of the Intentional Wellbeing Podcast.
Thank you for making space for me. It was so lovely to be here.
So fun. And for everyone, I'll see you next time. If you enjoy this podcast, please do me a favor. Go on Apple Podcasts and give it a big like, thumbs up, and rate it. Share it with your friends. I think this is a particularly poignant one on community care and self-care and intentional well-being with yoga therapist Naya. Thank you so much, everyone.